No, just leave it on. It's recording now. Just frame it if you can. And it's sorry if you could check the legs are sort of squishy.
Well, disorganized and all of that. Yes, unfortunately, sometimes that happens. Usually,
but if we can learn from it.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm not saying
if we say these new places, it's going to be very much better. But
and I think even better.
Hey, Diggs! Matt! Good morning, class.
Who are you talking about?
Could you like watch the sounds? If you do the audio? Sure. Are you guys doing stuff? Yeah, we're fine. I'll watch. Sure. Okay. Let me just make sure it's initiative.
All right, I guess we're gonna get started, everybody. This is amazing. Thanks everybody for coming out. This is first of all, I'd like to inaugurate the Black Coffee Co-op. This is their first big public event. And they're really bringing a lot to the community. So everybody have a round of applause for everybody who's worked so hard to start up this space here. And make sure to drink lots of coffee until you're shaking, because that's what keeps you going. So, again, thanks everybody for coming out. As you probably know, this week is the one-year anniversary of the eviction of Zuccotti Park, the brutal eviction of Zuccotti Park that happened last year that put an end to the physical space of Occupy Wall Street. Following on that, there was brutal evictions of hundreds of camps across the country, and in the years since we've seen a pretty terrifying wave of repression following, including military raids on activist houses in Seattle, and as many, but maybe not all of you know, a grand jury convenes that a number of young activists are actually currently in jail for resisting. So this panel was, the two panels that we're having today as part of this event were convened as a way to try to respond to this situation and broaden our perspective about the history of repression in the Pacific Northwest, hearing from some of the wisdom of people who dealt with this before. So we're very honored to have some voices of experience and wisdom here to share what they've lived through, how they responded, how the movements thrived in the face of previous repression. This will be the theme of the first panel, the historical experience of repression in the Pacific Northwest, and I'll introduce our speakers in a moment. We're going to have about an hour for our speakers, and then we'll have about a half an hour for Q&A. We'll take half an hour break, because it's kind of a long time to sit in a chair. Come back, and the second panel will start up about 4, probably a tad late. And we'll be hearing from a number of experts who are dealing with the contemporary situation, both with the grand juries and the raids that have been happening in Seattle and in the Pacific Northwest, and also nationally with a wave of post-Occupy repression. That'll be another hour panel, half-hour Q&A. And then lastly, followed by a workshop where people are going to sort of try to come together, find people interested in working on support in various different ways, and come together, exchange networks. So that's what we're looking at today. Since we have a lot of brilliant, amazing people to hear from and not so much time, I'm just going to get started. To my left, we have Kit Backey, who was active founding member, I believe, of the Students for Democratic Society and active with the Weather Underground. I hope you don't mind me telling this part. I found it fascinating that Kit was one of the delegation from Weather Underground that went to Cuba to meet with the leadership of North Vietnam to try to strategize how to bring that tribal war to an end. So thank you so much, Kit, for coming today. Kit's also a young adult author of several books, including Dot to Dot. So please check that out when you can. Mark Jenkins, right here. Thanks again for coming. Mark is a professor at the University of Washington up here in the district in Seattle. A professor of drama, and has written a play called All Power is Necessary and Convenient about the nature of the Red Scare in Washington State, which Mark mentioned actually happened before McCarthy. Everybody associates it with McCarthy. So we'll be hearing from him about the Red Scare repression that happened in this area in the 50s. And then very honored to have Ron Johnson, former lieutenant of the Black Panther Party, Seattle, the Black Panther Party, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, is the most important revolutionary group in American history. And the Seattle branch, I just learned, was the first to start outside of California. So the Seattle branch of the Black Panther Party has a very important history, and as Ron just notified me, was third on the list for repression priorities on the FBI documents that were released. So can't wait to hear about Ron's experience with that. And then Mark Cook. Mark Cook has joined us as well, Seattle native. Woo! Maybe hold your applause for everybody. Mark has spoken at local events before recently, so I think some of you are familiar. Active with the George Jackson Brigade, amazing revolutionary group from Seattle, multiracial, anarchist and left communist coalition, majority queer, a group that in many ways sort of was cutting edge in a lot of its formations, as detailed in Daniel Burton Rose's recently released book, Guerrilla USA, that I would highly recommend. So I'm going to turn it over. This first panel is going to be basically a discussion. We're not going to necessarily just have each person talk, but I just would like to ask a question, and then each of you answer it as you feel compelled, as you feel interested in things, and you're not compelled to answer each question, just whichever seems interesting. So, my first question for the panelists is, what do you think it was, rhetoric aside, in reality, what do you think it was that scared the status quo, that scared the establishment, that triggered, that motivated the wave of repression that was expressed? What was it that made somebody in some office start prioritizing this and making these decisions?
Well, since my subject matter goes back the furthest, maybe it's appropriate that we start. So as Sean pointed out, this play I wrote is about the early McCarthy era, before it was called the McCarthy era. The origins of what happened began back in the 30s at the very least. Actually, Seattle has a long and storied career of being having a lot of leftist activity from the IWW through early labor efforts and into the 30s. But this, what really brought about the Canwell Committee, as they call this, that happened in 1948, was that in the 30s there were professors at the University of Washington who were very left-wing and very active left-winger. There were wingers, and there were leftists in the legislature. It was a pretty liberal state with a lot of power in the hands of the left. And there was a theater company also in the 30s, from 29 to 49, the Seattle Repertory Playhouse, which has no relationship to the Seattle Repertory Theater. There was a nationally known, very progressive theater, and they did a lot of political plays. Well, some of the parents of the students at the University of Washington in the 30s got very upset. They were accusing the University of Washington of corrupting their children, subverting them, and so on. And there were some long-held grudges. Then when the war ended, World War II ended, and the Iron Curtain went up, there got to be a lot of fear in the general population about communism. And it got parlayed into a whole big movement, the McCarthy era, that was exploitative as well as it was pretty exploitative. There was a man named Albert Canwell, who was a first-year legislator from Spokane, who started this committee, Un-American Activities Committee in Washington State. And that's really the origin of it. I'll speak more a little later how that got manifested.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I think the question was, why were groups that opposed the American system oppressed or repressed? I think the reason why is because America works on this the basis that everybody's taken care of. If you're an American, the American government will take care of you. But when people begin to rise up and expose the contradictions in that concept or in that lie, where then people begin to wake up and say, hey, I'm not taken care of, I don't have adequate medical care, I'm not taken care of. I don't have a job. I'm not taken care of. I don't have decent food to eat and stuff like that. And that's one of the main things the Black Panther Party was really was able to upset the government, because they began to educate the people that were believing that they could go to the government to be taken care of for their basic needs, human rights, and they weren't taken care of. In fact, they were being deprived of the human rights because of the American concept of greed, corporate greed, and corporate America trying to make profits. So the people were basically used as fodder so the corporations and the chosen few in this country could become rich, you know. And so when you expose that fact, the people become angry because they've been fooled that long. So people become angry on, not just on an educated level, but on every level. They begin to say, this is why my children are dying. This is why we're dying. This is why we're hungry. This is why we're unemployed. Because only a few, I believe we say 1%, or only a few control the wealth that the majority creates, that the majority think that they're entitled to. So what you have to stop that voice, or else you get open rebellion. You have to silence the voice that exposes the contradictions, and that's why they decided to expose or destroy the Black Panther Party, because through active survival programs and meeting the needs of the people, we were actually exposing the fact that the greedy American government was not doing it. So the arm of the corporate America, which is the police and the FBI and COINTELPRO and all this type of stuff, they had to come up and they had to actively infiltrate, use clever and creative methods to try to destroy us, you know, like that. And so the more they tried to destroy us, the more we would expose them. And so the more we expose them, the more they tried to destroy us. And so we still have a perpetual thing going on today.
What I believe upset the government the most is that groups with political ideas started taking action. That's what the Black Panther Party did. That's what drew me into being political. I was in prison at the time, and based on the program that Black Panther Party gave us, we set to work activating prisoners inside to get work projects. We changed the prison system in the United States during that period. The Black Panther Party was able to come into the prison and do a sickle cell anemia program. But there was always a consistent activism of the party and others on the streets, whether it was the party, whether underground, AIM. It was that consistency that really upset the government, and they started getting these police forces created, secret police forces created.
Hi, thank you also everybody for coming. And this is a wonderful group of people. The repression will happen only when things aren't going the way that the government wants it to go. I mean, or the people in power. In other words, the whole point of repression is to maintain the status quo. And if the status quo is being jiggled by resistance, as Ron was talking about, people noticing what's really going on, then the repression is gonna focus on the resistance. So it's really two ways. There won't be visible repression if there's no resistance, and the more resistance there is, the more repression is going to come down in all kinds of different ways, which I hope we're going to get a chance to talk about a little bit. In terms of white people, for us, we may not have been, suffering a lack of gifts from the powers that be, but we suddenly noticed that other people in the world were really getting the short end of the stick. And the Vietnam War was a huge educator for all of us. And the civil rights movement, similarly, right here in our own country, we were killing people. And that was not the way it was supposed to be. For people of my generation, we grew up thinking America had saved the world from fascism. I mean, we thought we did. Our parents, killed Hitler. We grew up thinking the government had really rescued the world for democracy. And then as we got a little older and we saw the stuff going on in the South and Selma and et cetera, and then the war in Vietnam, we realized, this isn't true. Something is wrong. And that's kind of when we got we noticed that the world was different than we had been raised to think it was.
So several of the answers led up to this one. What did the repression look like? Both what happened and what was the logic behind it? Was it just sort of lashing out? Did it have its own logic that it was setting it out about? So both sort of the levels of what happened with it and what were they after?
I've got a couple of slides on that. Do you want to show them or not?
Sure.
Okay.
So Kit's going to start out.
I actually, it was sort of fun preparing for this and thinking a little bit about organizing, how repression is organized, and then how resistance organizes alongside it, if you will. So if we just look at the first, keep going. That's the first one. This is just in case people don't remember the 60s. I can tell you every single picture, but we won't do that right now. Go ahead. So the how of the repression here. I don't need to look at that. The how of repression is repression. It scares people into silence and passivity. That's one way repression works. It intimidates people into talking. One example of that is one of the things that the FBI did for our parents. In other words, when we were underground, the FBI would knock on our parents' door and say, I'm sorry, we've just learned that your daughter has been killed. We need you to come down to the morgue and identify the body. Can you tell us where she was and who else was she with? In other words, they would do horrible things like that to intimidate people into talking and telling them things they otherwise might not have told them. Repression also, they confuse people so you can't get organized. In other words, there are infiltrators and provocateurs who are in our midst and are feeding us fake stories about somebody. I think they make you get paranoid because you say, I wonder if that person is really with us. And they get leadership arguing with itself. They create splinter groups within, in other words, preventing the people from getting together in an organized way. And then obviously throwing people in jail, killing them, disappearing them, which is sort of the Latin American technique. Any organization that loses its leadership has difficulty, first of all, focusing on the issue. You want to focus on the leaders. Let's get them out of jail. Let's do whatever we can take to get them back instead of focusing on the issue, whatever the issue is that the organization was made to do. So that's a problem. And all of these techniques, of course, were always used with much more ferocity against the Panthers, Latinos, the American Indian movement. Non-whites get it way worse than we do. Okay, I think that's it. Next slide, a couple of the other things they would do is they would go into demonstrations, cops would go into demonstrations in plain clothes and just beat people up. And this happened up in the University District a number of times when there were demonstrations on the Ave. They just would beat people up. They weren't arresting people, they had no ID, they were just being vigilante cops, and that was all well known. Subpoenas, which you guys are going to learn more about, I suspect grand juries are very intimidating and repressing. And murder is obviously the sort of last ditch, or if not, anyway, murder is another way that movements are repressed. I talk about carrots and self-repression. I think people can repress themselves, and I think people can be bought off. And that's the carrot part. I mean, it's not all a stick. It can be a carrot. They can buy you off. They can bribe you. Repression is very creative. Can be very creative. So we have to be just as creative. That's awesome.
For being in the movement, being in the Black Panther Party and being in the leadership of the Black Panther Party here in Seattle, I found out that oppression would try to disguise itself as wolf in sheep's clothing. In other words, the oppressor or the repressor would come in trying to act like he was beneficial, basically for the movement.
Can you keep a distance between the microphone? Yeah, just a little.
That he was. Can everybody hear me?
A little closer.
That he was. That they were beneficial, and that the actual people that were providing the services are exposing the contradictions in society were the antagonists. So they tried to make it look like we wouldn't be here beating you upside the head if the Black Panthers wouldn't have caused us to be down here. So that would bring about an anger against the Black Panthers for the people that didn't know what the Black Panthers were doing. So what we understood to do, we had to organize what we call survival programs in the community. In other words, revolution wasn't just a bunch of slogans, but it was work. Whereas children wasn't being fed breakfast, we didn't try to pull the government in or get government funds to feed the kids. We went and got funds and fed the kids by any means necessary. In other words, if the people's houses was infested with roaches, we developed free pest control program. We were creative enough to provide survival programs so that by the time the repressor would come trying to make us look like the villain, they would actually be looked upon as the villain. Matter of fact, one time at our headquarters on 19th and Spruce, which Aaron brings out in his book called My People Shall Rise, which is a very good book he just released, Aaron Dixon. And he brought it out, and I was actually part of this, where the police would try to surround the Black Panther headquarters on 16th and Spruce, which was in the community. But because we had defined ourselves through acts of survival and meeting people like medical care and meeting people's basic needs and sacrificing and being there where the people were actually able to witness who we really were. So by the time the police got there with their propaganda machine, old people, older citizens had surrounded the house by the time the media got there, and they said, you're not going to get to these Panthers because they're feeding our kids. They're providing medical care. You're not going to put your hands on them. So they actually had to call the mayor out to call the police off of us. So what happened is they got there trying to make the community think that we were villains, and by the time, because of the work we had been doing to help the people, they were actually portrayed as the original villains and couldn't conduct a raid or the repression that they tried to do. So what I'm trying to say is that even the Black Panther newspaper, it was an organ that we used to define ourselves. If you're a movement and you don't define yourself, you're going to be defined by the enemy. And the enemy is going to define you as being negative and counterproductive. So you have to take it on yourself to use propaganda, literature, news articles and stuff to define who you are and what your platform is and what your intentions are. And then to the faithful letter, carry out those intentions so the people can actually see that you're there to help them and not to hinder them.
Well, back in the 40s, with the anti-communist hearings that took place, these people weren't really on the streets fighting. They weren't as confrontational by any means as the Panthers and the Weather Underground. It was much more, quote, civilized, I would say. And people were following rules and regulations and supposedly laws. The interesting part of that was how much those rules and regulations and laws were sort of set aside and winked at by the powers that be. And so it was a little more subtle, and there wasn't so much blood spilled in the streets, but there was a lot of lives ruined by this repression. And what I found interesting was the range of response to the repression from these mostly middle-class people. Everybody's feet were put to the fire, and there were people who responded vastly different ways, which I think is useful for the Occupy movement to know when you're really under siege, is that it's going to really test the character of each of the participants. Some people are going to stand up, resist, maintain their integrity and honor, and suffer the consequences. Other people will preserve themselves, but try not to get anybody else in trouble. There will be some people who will crack and name names and cooperate. There will be some that will be more than willing to. And there will be people who lie and perjure themselves for it. I think this is a typical response to. This is one of the typical what you could expect if you're really under siege.
The government, one of their means of repression is to silence people. The Panther Party put out a newspaper, and they wouldn't be silenced that way. While I was inside the penitentiary, we got Panther papers. They were taken away from us by the administration as soon as they came in. So we did what's called a Janus activity. We created an underground that criticized the administration severely, and then we also, on the other face, criticized that group for trying to bring repression down on us. Well, of course, the prison population supported the underground. They didn't know who the underground was. And like I said, there was 5 of us. We were the underground, and we were also the ones who instigated against the underground. What happened? Yeah, what happened was that prison was eventually locked down, and we were printing this underground newspaper. The administration didn't know how we were printing. It came out on a what's called mimeograph paper, but they shut down all the mimeograph machines, and it kept coming out. Then they took the liquid to use in mimeograph machines. They shut all that down, and we still came out. They locked us down. Everybody was locked down in their cells, and the paper still came out. So, and this was our underground portion of the event. To undermine us, the paper itself, the administration said, okay, we're going to listen to grievances. And they asked people to come forward. Of course, the straw bosses, which are not straw bosses, but the prison bosses, prisoner bosses came out. Prisoner bosses are guys who are heads of shops or recreation or, groups, whatever it is. He knew who they were, so he asked them to speak for the whole population. So he called them in and asked what the grievances were. Of course, I was in the Panther Party, so I was one of the bosses at that time. The other main people in the underground were all Canadians. I know it's surprising to a lot of you, but they were very revolutionary during that time. And they're the ones that taught me a whole lot of new tricks. So we went before the administration and told them what the grievances were. He passed it on to Olympia, which were his bosses. And the prison administration was told to give us some kind of, be some kind of a part of the governing of that institution. And so the warden told us to sit down and write up a document. We wrote up a document that's called RGC. And the Canadians started off with the letters RGC, and then we had to figure out what they was going to mean later on. The reason they did this was there was one prisoner named Wayne Roberts, and we wanted to get him out. He was doing life sentence. We wanted to get him out of the penitentiary, kind of escape type thing. Well, anyways, R stood for Roberts, G stood for Goes, and C stood for Canada. He was a Canadian, and we got him out. But anyways, it was officially known as the Resident Governmental Council. Okay, that revamped all the prison policies in the state of Washington at that time. Prisoners were able to be more than an advisory council. They wanted to help govern. Okay, and the repression came down from the guards who hated the big turnover because the guards were the bosses at that time, and now they were on an even keel with the prisoners. During the writing of this Constitution, our second phase of the Janus, we wrote the Constitution for the prisoners. Then, in our underground status, we criticized it. We said that those guys were selling you out, they're not getting as much as they can. And the underground paper told them to burn the Constitution. So in front of the mess hall, they threw all the Constitutions down and they burned it. And went back and the administration said, okay, you can change the Constitution. So those 2 phases helped. That was just a technique we used at that time. And it became pretty powerful. Later on, we did other things. After I got out, I looked for the Panther Party. Most of them had gone to California. Yeah, there was some still here. Most of them gone to California. And I tried to figure out what I'm going to do. What am I going to do? I'm an ex-prisoner. And so that's when I first became this prisoner advocate. And I became part of a George Jackson Gate, which is mostly ex-prisoners. And the stories told in those books, I don't want to get into that right now. That's just some examples.
The next question I was going to ask, I think sort of came into that one, which is sort of what was not only the nature of the repression, but the response to it, but it sounds like the two were so intertwined. So feel free to add anything else that comes out about that, about sort of strategies in defense and in resistance to the repression. But the next question, I guess, is more, what were the strengths and the weaknesses of the movement as a whole, or even kind of the moment that came out, that maybe weren't so evident, but that came out through the the repression and the response to the repression.
I think one of the weaknesses of the Black Panther Party was that we were young and inexperienced, but we were dedicated. Matter of fact, the Black Panther Party was a combination of the street brother and basically the educated brother. You say Bobby Seale was like the street brother, that had the street savvy, but didn't have the legal or the intellectual knowledge or ability to carry out, so it was like a street. And then Huey would be projected as the intellectual brother that basically had the not college know-how and the legal system and stuff like that. So they had the concept, they said, let's organize, let's combine these two traits, the zeal of the street person, and the knowledge of the intellectual. Let's put them into one, into one. So the party platform was formed. And so basically one of the tactics was to intelligently confront, the system, not just openly and do it with emotion, because that would be to their advantage. So we formed like what we call police patrols, because there was a lot of police brutality going on in the community. Police would jack people up, isolate them, and beat them, and brutalize them, and stuff like that. And we knew that was unlawful, for the police to retain somebody without probable cause, because that came from the intellectual side. And so to confront them came from the street side, like that. Matter of fact, we would follow the police, keep a distance, get across the street and say, if the police pull somebody over for probable cause, what they were trying to get probable cause, profile them, and just pull them over because they were suspicious, violated their rights, we would tell them we wouldn't be too close, or we'd be smart enough to be far enough away, or we wouldn't be arrested for getting in the police way, but we'd be close enough to where they could hear us, and close enough where the police could see our guns. And so we would also let them know, hey brother, you got the right to walk away, like that. If they don't have no right to arrest you, you don't have to answer no questions. You don't have to let them go in your pockets. You don't have to let them search you and stuff like this. This was before the Patriot Act and all that stuff, where they just go in folks' pockets now. But they had to have probable cause to go in somebody's pocket. It's called illegal search and seizure. So we would tell them and read it right out the law book, like that, the rights. And so the brother would actually walk away. And then we tell him, walk to us, come behind us. And they come behind us, and we, slap the guns up, and the police, the cowards, they didn't want to confront the guns, so they gone back to the station mad, trying to figure out other ways that we can get around this particular tactic. But that's one of the ways we got around, repression was dealing with, merging the intellectual. When we started the free medical clinic on 19th and Spruce, we found out that people weren't getting adequate medical care, so we terminized that as a form of genocide. Because if you have a right to medical care and you're not getting it, it's genocide because they let you die. So what we did, we got liberal doctors, and they would come in and they would start medical procedures right in the house. They would get appropriate medical equipment, like that. I say appropriate medical equipment, so we could set up clinics right in the house and stuff like that. And we would put together medical clinics where people could come and line up and get medical care, because back in those days, an elderly person had to choose between medical care and eating. So either they would starve or die because they couldn't get the proper medical care because they couldn't afford it. So we brought in free medical attention and stuff like that. Matter of fact, the Carolyn Downs Family Medical Center is we started that. She was a young Black Panther woman, Carolyn Downs, working in the community, and now it's an established clinic on Yesler. You probably know about Odessa Brown and the different clinics, country doctor and stuff like that, all came behind the fact that people had a medical right. Medical attention was a free right and not a privilege.
Well, the question being, what was strong and what was weak about the people who were under siege? Is that right?
Yeah. What came out through the repression about the character of the movement?
Yeah. So most of these people who were targeted in the 40s most of them were middle class. There were a lot of union people, a lot of working class people too, but the part that I'm aware of mostly that I researched was about professors and theater people, and they were all living fairly good lives. I mean, so the leverage was their livelihoods, and the committees managed to destroy, and the FBI, lots and lots of livelihoods. People went to Canada after this they couldn't work anymore. One of the people who was fired from the university had been a carpenter. He went back to carpentering, and the FBI would come to the construction sites and tell the people, the boss, that you've got a communist working for you, and they'd fire them. So that was their main means of, and they also were contempt trials for people who didn't cooperate with the hearings, and some people went to jail and were fined for that. Now, in terms of the strength of the movement, there are some people I think are really, really admirable, intellectuals and who really embraced Marxism, and they viewed the whole world as the capitalism was failing, and what was going to happen was either fascism or communism, and they embraced Marxism, and that was sort of the whole thing. The weaknesses of the movement, I think, were what I've already spoken to. The variable characters who were involved, who could withstand what. So that was really nice.
Okay, I was thinking we could change the pictures.
Yeah.
There's actually
been a while.
people are kind of bored, I'm sure, at that. So no, go to the end. Keep going. One more, another more. There. Why don't you just let the pictures stay up for a while? So the sort of how did the movement respond to repression in the late 60s and early 70s, I guess would be the question. Part of the way we survived, of course, was that we were swimming it was easy for us to hide and not get caught. We, first of all, knew how to dress up and look like a regular person. We knew that we could go anywhere in the country. I mean, the youth culture, the youth movement in the country in the late 60s and early 70s was so wide open and so trusting. You could show up in any city in the country, and you could find the neighborhood, and you could go there, and you could find a place to sleep, you could find food, there would be people to take care of you, you could find lawyers. I mean, there was this sea, and that Mao has this quote about the people's armies floating in the sea of, I forget what it is, but that was really like that. So we had a lot of support that way from people who didn't have the nerve maybe to do what we were doing, but they were very supportive in every other way to help keep us alive. Let me talk quickly about the response to the federal conspiracy indictments that came down here in Seattle, the Seattle 7. The Seattle 7 originally were 8. One guy split, went underground, and never showed up for trial, and hasn't really. He is enjoying a nice rest in somewhere else. So the Seattle 7 were a group of very disparate people who, in fact, several of them had never even met each other before they showed up in court. But they were charged with conspiring to cross state lines to incite a riot and conspiring to use interstate commerce to incite a riot. Those are two laws that came out of the 1968 Civil Rights Act, believe it or not. That was a response, a governmental response to all of the ghetto riots after Martin Luther King was assassinated. There were all those riots, and one of those, I think the crossing state lines is known as the Rat Brown Law, because he went from, I think, Maryland to DC and whatever. So this was basically taking what would have been a state criminal act, like throwing a rock through a window, and making it into a federal crime of conspiracy. This was a huge jump up. So in Seattle, after the Chicago 7 trial, the Chicago 7 trial were the 7 people who were charged with inciting the same sort of conspiracy, the exact same charges, after the Democratic National Convention. That trial went on for a long time. It was a joke. The judge was senile and very biased. The jury was sent to deliberate. The judge at that point, while the jury was still deliberating, sentenced all the defendants and all their lawyers to jail for contempt for dozens of years. I mean, it added up to hundreds of years, while the jury was still deliberating. So the day after that happened, there were demonstrations all over the country to react to that. I mean, they were called TDA, the day after demonstrations. There was one in Seattle. It was no bigger or more violent than that was happening in many other cities. However, there were federal conspiracy charges brought against the supposed leaders of that demonstration in Seattle and nowhere else in the country. And it raises this question again of what is it about Seattle? Why did, and the indictments were announced not in Seattle, but in Washington, D.C. by J. Edgar Hoover and John Mitchell, who was Attorney General at that time, who ironically went on to be charged with conspiracy himself in the Watergate stuff. So the trial was held. These 7 people, 6 men and 1 woman, who actually didn't really know each other all that well and had no idea. 2 of them weren't even there in Seattle during the demonstration. And the interstate commerce part of the law, you need to pay attention to this, has to do with telephones. Telephones, at least landlines, I actually don't know about cell phones, they didn't exist then. But landlines are controlled by interstate commerce. So the fact that one of the defendants was on the phone in a public meeting with somebody in Chicago, actually Jerry Rubin, that constituted his conspiracy, why he could get the federal law against him. Anyhow, the defendants in the Seattle trial didn't believe they could get a fair trial. It was quite obvious from the Chicago experience that nobody was interested in giving these people a fair trial. And the judge in the Seattle case was equally elderly and senile and kept talking about, I need to go for divine guidance. And I mean, he literally talked about praying and divine guidance for his next legal judicial ruling. So the defendants didn't think they had a chance, so they spent the whole time joking and trying to get the court, trying to talk about the war in Vietnam, actually. You know, to say it's not about us, it's about what's happening over there. It's not about the courthouse, it's about My Lai and Saigon, and it's trying to bring the real issues to the courtroom, which of course didn't go over very well. So they did a number of things. Anyway, the trial ended in a mistrial. And then the judge called a mistrial and then immediately sentenced everybody to jail for contempt. So that's a tactic that's worth sort of paying attention to, that can happen. Now, in both cases, both the Chicago trial and the Seattle trial, all the charges were eventually dropped. Nobody, after they were in jail for a while on the contempt charges until the appeals court reversed everything. That, I guess the point I want to make, and I'll stop, is the government didn't really care if they got convictions or not. That wasn't the point. The point was to get them off the streets, get those people away from their organizations, off the streets, and they were successful in that.
I have a little diversionary thing that might be kind of interesting about, you mentioned what is it about Seattle. One of the chief witnesses in the Canwell hearings was brought in from New York not by the FBI, but the FBI, not officially by the FBI, and he deliberately perjured himself, and they found out. And so he was back in New York, and the state of Washington, the city of Seattle, filed perjury charges against this witness. And so he went to a judge in New York, and the judge, this is what the judge said, what he wrote back. He said, from what has been said, I learned that in the state of Washington, there is any number of trained and iron-disciplined communists who have operated with seeming immunity. Many of them hold almost impregnable positions of confidence and trust in the communities. I'm wondering, really generally wondering, what the civilization of that area is.
Being of a certain age, I remember when they referred to the state of Washington, as they said, the 47 states, no, the 47 states and the Soviet of Washington. They have more socials up in this corner than any other part of the state, I guess. But in retrospect, looking back at what our weaknesses were, is that we weren't able to communicate sufficiently to the public. We had a lot of support, but in retrospect, right now, people are probably more admiring of what went on, our struggle went on back then, than the people who were actually there. They were afraid of us. They thought we were bringing down repression on them. And it was a hard struggle. But these newspapers that came out, and there was newspapers from everybody. I mean, not only the Panthers, there was the AMU, I forgot, Akaseswini Notes or whatever, remember that? I think it still exists. The Native American papers, the Weather Underground put out several different papers, even though they split, they kept trying to communicate. In the end, they're more communicating with themselves than they were with the public. And it's important that if you become involved in action, what you do, you're trying to represent the majority of the public. Things that are taken away from us, like right now, the Constitution is being taken away. The right to habeas corpus is being taken away. The right to privacy is being taken away. And these things have to be conveyed to the public. If you're an activist or whether you're just into the rhetoric, you have to let the public know that this is serious. It's going downhill. When I was working with the brigade, our attacks were on the corporate. We attacked the corporate and the government. We attacked the Department of Corrections when they were repressing people, prisoners, did a bombing in their office after everybody was gone and blew out that whole floor, and they changed their policies in the prisons. They let people out of the hole that were kept in there for a long time. By the way, right now, I'm working with as a prisoner advocate with the people in California, and you probably heard of it. They've had one of the longest and strongest struggles down there. They have people 30, 40 years in isolation, never been out. And they did the prisoners, 60,000 of them went on hunger strike for 3 days, 60,000 prisoners. And that's a lot of support. Looking at California prisons, if you've ever been there, ever worked with these people, you know there's very diverse groups. There's the black groups, Chicano groups, and the white groups that are against each other. We're against each other out in the population. These have all been joined together. And for the last year and a half, they've been solidified. The leadership of all these groups have solidified it. And I give all the support I can to it. That's one reason I'm a prison advocate. I continue with my work. But going back to some of the work that we did in the 70s, we attacked the Laurelhurst transformer because the workers were on strike. The union workers for the city were on strike. They had a lot of conditions. Women were not being given the same wage as men in certain areas. And after that was done, we got a message from the city light workers, and one of them said that every New Year's, this happened on New Year's, every New Year's after that, we have toasted the George Jackson Brigade. And you know, sounded pretty, I won't say phony, but I actually met one of them up there in Freeway Hall, and she said, yes, that's what we did. We actually did that. And there was a lot of actions they got behind that struggle. But our attacks were on the corporate and on the government. And we did our communiques. If you ever get a chance to read A Movement with Teeth, you'll see some of the communiques in there. And it defined specifically, we had them published on the radio, we had them published in newspapers, and they were just distributed on the streets around here. We're a small group, but they were reprinted, and it gave people an idea of what we were trying to do, you know, how we're trying to help. But our biggest weakness, again, I have to say, is we tried, but it's communicating clearly, not in the old Marxist and socialist rhetoric, you know, with the bourgeoisie and the lumpen proletariat and stuff, like speaking a language that they can understand. And I'm glad to see a lot of the people around here working now are speaking in that clear language. the anarchists, whenever they're active, people scorn and say, you're ruining our movement, you're ruining our movement. But the anarchists are probably the longest, most consistent movement we've ever had, from going back to the 1800s up till now. They haven't given up a stroke. And they're organized on a grassroots base where the police cannot find the leadership. They try, they bust into houses and things like that. But they can't find the leadership because those people are crazy. Excuse me. They just don't have a single program to attack. But even in the work as an anarchist, you have to let the public, the general public, know why you're doing it. If you attack Starbucks or pennies or roads or anything, let the people know why you're doing this stuff. That's very important, because that's going to be a weakness in your organization, in your work.
One of the major things that we did a lot of major things, but one of the major things we did as the Black Panther Party, you can't be afraid to form alliances with other groups that's along the same principles that you have, like that. You can't isolate yourselves. And as long as we isolated ourselves, they were able to do secretive things to us, and nobody knew about it. But when it came all across the country, that COINTELPRO, everybody know about COINTELPRO. I believe that's counterintelligence, like that, FBI counterintelligence, which I always say is an oxymoron when you mix intelligence with FBI. But what it is, what they did, they tried to compile information on different people, church leaders, Martin Luther King, and everybody all across the country. Anybody that ever said anything against America, if you said that the army uniform shouldn't be green, in foreign countries, well then, they put you on the list as being, against the United States government, no matter what your intentions was, no matter what your motives was. And they had thousands and thousands of files which was kept secret that they would pull out, in order if they wanted to embarrass somebody, or if they wanted to bring somebody, destroy somebody's career, put some propaganda out on somebody. J. Edgar Hoover started this files and started this active program called COINTELPRO, when he said that the Black Panther Party was the most feared organization in America. But anyway, what we did, we formed alliances all across the country. The Panthers formed alliances, and different groups formed alliances. And here we formed with the local ACLU, which was called, they formed a organization called Committee Against Government Spying. And what they did, out of that, all across the country came what we know now the Freedom of Information Act. And so all these files that they tried to keep secret, because we put so much pressure on them and exposed the fact that they had these files, they couldn't hide the fact. Well, then they came up with a ruling that every day, if they had a file on you, a known file on you, every day that they kept that file and it was discovered that they had kept that file, they would be fined $3,500 a day. For every day they kept that file. So that pressured them into giving up the files, even though they gave them up impartial. Like if they would give up a file on me and Aaron, or Aaron Dixon, or Elmer Dixon, they would blank out everybody's name but my name in that file, like that. So they gave up, I had a file from Elmer, Aaron, and myself. So all we did was just put them together. So, and we had basically a complete document of the plots and schemes that they had against us. And you'd be amazed at some of the plots and schemes they would have against us. We're going to act like they was arguing at their wife. We're going to act like it was a domestic argument. We're going to break in on a political rally. We're going to check with the local people. And we're going to stir up false charges against party leaders and stuff like that. And they would actually have plots and schemes and everything in these memorandums, and they actually had to print them out and give them to us. So I'm saying sometimes you might feel like you're defeated in getting some stuff. Of course, we didn't get everything, but we got most of the outline, and we were able to give the American public an idea of what they were doing and just how corrupt they were.
I have this is one of my books called Miss Alcott's Email, where I talk about my weather experiences, and there's a picture of one page of my FBI file in it, and you can see how it's all blacked out. Where actually mostly what they black out is the names of agents and people that they don't want you to go kill. So that's mostly it. Yeah, right. I know we're heading on time, right? We're on time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say we were crazy. I think our biggest weakness was we were just nuts. We were so angry that we couldn't think straight, which is what you're pointing out is a weakness, and it causes problems. We were not very good at communicating with regular people because we were just so subsumed by this anger and helpless anger that we couldn't think strategically after a while. So that's something to advice to the smarter people of this generation.
I'd like to wrap this up by making a recommendation for anybody who hasn't seen or read this book. It's a new book that is based on recently released FBI files about the free speech movement in Berkeley in the 60s. And it's called Subversives, and it just came out in the last month, I think. And I'm about halfway through it. It is really, really instructive for anybody who's an activist now, but to covering all these things that we've been talking about. So I would recommend it.
Circulate is here to stay.
First of all, a round of applause for a totally amazing panel. So I think moving around is kind of packed in here, so that would take up a lot of time. I guess what we're going to try to do with the Q&A is maybe if you have a question, raise your hand. I guess I'll call on people, try to rotate it fairly, exercising progressive stack, of course, and maybe just say your question. We are recording. What's going to happen is in the recordings we're going to edit out the Q&A voices, but I will repeat your question beforehand, so that will be in. So your question will be in, but nobody's voices will be in, because I know people will. Yeah. Oh, right, and a couple other announcements. First of all, this is, I know some people might not stick around the whole time, this is basically an event to draw attention to the current situation of repression, and especially the courage being practiced right now by a number of grand jury resistors. First of all, let's give them a round of applause. And also, as you can imagine, it's an extremely demanding thing to try to go up against the kind of institutions that they're going up against. So they need all the help they can get. We have a jar up at the front. If you can please do what you can to donate that. Part of that's going to go to cover the costs of transport for some of the speakers for this event, but after that, all of it's going to be going directly to the grand jury resistors. I think mainly to their commissaries and to the, yeah. So please pay attention to the jar on your way out, and that's who it's going to. So yeah, we're going to have questions, and then I'll repeat the question so we can have that in the recording and take it to the panel. In the red jacket.
Yeah, during the discussion, somebody said dress up like a normal person, and then when you talk to regular people, I would like someone to define, please, for me, what is a normal person and what is regular people?
I don't know if everybody heard that. The question was, it was said in the panel to dress like normal people and speak like normal people, but the question is, what exactly is a normal person? Essentially.
I think that was me. I certainly meant no disrespect. What I was talking about was just people who weren't full-time in the movement. That's normal people.
I just want to say that nobody's really crazy. People are just fed up. I believe that people are just tired, like that. And when we talk about people being crazy, when we say that people are creative, they're creative enough to come up with stuff that somebody else hasn't come up with, to catch the system by surprise and stuff like that. Because when we were Black Panther Party members, I mean, we was wild and outrageous. We did a lot of stuff that you look back now on and you say, wow, how did we live through that, like that. But we applied those methods, and ironically enough, those methods were successful.
Oh, sorry, I'm going to repeat it just
You don't have to edit my voice, so that's okay.
So my question is, there seems historically to be a real ebb and flow in the size of mobilizations and movements, and basically the amount of organizing that's going on. And right now, we're seeing this new sort of birth of a new mobilization, and I'm wondering what your suggestions are, what you've learned from your experience, how we can maintain this better than other movements have been maintained in the past, so that it doesn't sort of dissipate in a few years, which seems to be what's historically happened.
What you have to do, you have to realize the value of principles as opposed to tactics. In other words, you might not like somebody's tactics, but if the principles behind those particular tactics were successful, you should respect those principles, because principles, I believe, transcend time. In other words, principles are like I believe that principles are like laws. If I throw a rock up in the air, gravity's going to bring it down, right? Because that's the principle of gravity. But now, just because I don't like who's throwing the rock up in the air, don't mean that I'm going to discard that particular principle of gravity or ignore it. So what I'm trying to say is that in your movement, in your creativity, establish and study the historical perspective of the movements and look at the principles, try to get with them and find out what principles they have, like principles like sticking together, principles like commitment, principles like loyalty. Those are universal, like that, and those are necessary in every movement. So that, I think that's one of the benefits, will be one of the benefits. And another benefit, we have to realize that it's not going to be another Messiah. It's not going to be another Martin Luther King. It's not, because the government has band-aided itself against that successful movement like that. So we have to move on individuals, and individuals collectively join themselves together to realize that we all have a purpose and we all have a plan. I might not like the way you wear your hat, like that, but that doesn't mean that I have to push you out and isolate you. I have to look inside of you to see what you stand for, and we have to stop judging people by surface appearance, like that. We have to realize, that we have to establish positive and workable principles.
Within the party, we're socialists, communists, and anarchists, men, women, and some gay. But most of us came out of the prison movement, and that's something that we understood. The principles, in a sense, started there, and that's what joined us together, and we figured we could work together. There was a statement of the George Jackson Brigade that's put out, as probably long lost, but in it stated the principles of each organization. And we stayed together, we stayed tight, nobody ever rolled over anybody else, and we have stuck together to this day. Today, I still communicate with Ed Mead and Bo Brown, and we're still activists. All of us are still activists. Nobody has slipped away from it. Therese Coupage, she still works with the community down in San Francisco. Bo Brown is really popular down in Oakland. I don't know if anybody knows about Bo Brown, but she's probably stronger down there than me and Ed are up here. But we just stay active. Like we start off in different groups that we knew that the government, whether it was patriarchal, sexist, just authoritarian, fascist, it was the same target. We might have given it different names, it was the same target. We're able to work together and just stay with that thought. If you believe in it till you die. So you can grow old. I'm getting old and moldy, and my memories just disappearing on me fast. But I stay with my thought. I'll stand by people. Anytime I have a little money to give to somebody who's doing work, I do it. And you should do the same. Thanks.
Did you want to be recorded, or? Yeah. Okay.
My question is, how in repression, right? How do you deal with dynamics between, like, for example, the Oakland Panthers and LA Panthers, and a lot of people who are lumpen proletariat, been to prison already, been through it already, and people who have not, that you're both organizing on the same ground, but like coming from very different spaces, and not, and forgive me everybody in here, but coming from someone who's done time, like I am always skeptical and worried about people around me and how well they can handle both holding their water, but also how they can psychologically handle being incarcerated, period, especially if they've never been incarcerated as a youth or anything else. So.
We'll talk about the Panther around the United States, how they stick back together.
Yeah. Again, what it was the 10-point platform. So you got to have a platform that unites the purpose, that goes to what you're trying to do, like that. Because you might have individual fears and individual, insights into stuff, but then you become an individual, and individuals cannot form unity. So in order to form unity, the individuals must come collectively together and commit themselves to a platform of principles, like that. And the way the party did it, we had the 10-point platform. 10-point platform was put together from the needs, the beliefs, and the wants, what we believe and what we want, like that. And it was 10 points that dealt with basic human needs and basic human rights. And also we want those things that was contradicting human rights, contradicting that. I didn't say black rights, I said human rights. I didn't say prisoner rights, I said human rights. And that's another commonality. We're all human beings. So if we, like Martin Luther King, he transcended from civil rights to human rights, and then they put a price on his head, because when you start talking about human rights, you start connecting the whole world. You understand what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to say is that you develop principles that's based upon your human rights that you have, the right to breathe, the right to live, the right to eat, and stuff like that. And then anybody around you that contradicts getting those rights and willing to put something else before those rights, they become counterproductive to what you're trying to do. So they can't be part of what you're trying to do.
Just quickly, this might go back to the previous question a bit, but one of the best friends I've ever had, and Abe Ashraf, he died a couple of years ago. He was a communist in the 20s. He went to the Spanish Civil War. He built houses in Nicaragua. Every day of his life, he was a radical. And what he taught me was that at the bottom line, what any of us are trying to do is to enlighten our fellow beings at some level. And that's a revolutionary act. It can be a revolutionary act. And we do it in all very different means. But that's what got him out of bed in the morning. So I have a chance again today to enlighten somebody, to expand their consciousness.
I want to say quickly also, to be part of any revolutionary progressive movement, you have to have the concept that there must be change. You can't focus yourself in a position as to where you become unchangeable. You have to realize that everything around you is changing. So, you have to realize that the platform has to be ability to adjust and change according to the individual, according to the situation that you're dealing with. So it has to be changeable, but when it's changeable, you never take away none of the basic principles that it's founded on.
My name is Adrienne Weller, and I'm with the Freedom Socialist Party, and I really want to thank you all. And in the line of what you've been basically saying, I mean, it's really obvious the government is trying to isolate the anarchists, and we need to do everything we can to see that that doesn't happen, because that's the first step in basically isolating each group and destroying movements for change. What ideas do you have about how we can basically get together and work together to be able to keep the government from achieving that? Because that's essential. We cannot let them isolate the anarchists. And I know there's the labor movement, there's liberal movements, there's the socialist movement, and there's people who aren't in any movement but have different ideas. In what way could we all come together?
Well, we come together already. that's why everybody's here. Okay? When I was inside, and I hate to admit this, but my mind has kind of been fashioned by prison. That's why I'm prisoner. Out of 60 years, I spent 40 years in prison, locked behind bars, some kind of way, whether it's juvenile or on a. But when Dewey Newton allowed us to start a Panther chapter in Walla Walla, is the first prison chapter ever started. That's the Northwest, Seattle. We always start first of everything. But anyway, when we started that, we knew we could not operate the same way that Panthers did outside. And there was a newspaper that came in we did get hold of, and it was a poem by Ulysses. So we took that poem and made it our oath within the group, so that we would always be, it's kind of like being a solid con, but it goes something like this. If ever I should break my stride or falter at my comrade's side, this oath shall kill me. If ever I should withhold my hand, no, if ever I should, getting near the end anyways, hold my with a whole hand or show fear before the hangman, this oath shall surely kill me. The last part is probably the most important part. And like I say, my memory's gone. But we all took this oath to stand by each other, you know, as party members outside, as prisoners inside. And it's not just something you say as an oath, like you're pledging allegiance or anything like that. It's got to be something in your mind, in your heart, that you're going to stand by your partner. It's not right or wrong. It's not one of those things where you stand by them right or wrong. You stand by them as long as they are principled. In the last 24 years I did inside, that's the way we stood. There was a great many political prisoners inside, and that's the way we stood. Whenever we were transferred, we all knew where somebody's going, so somebody's always there ready to pick them up when they got there. We treated ourselves that way, and we treated other prisoners the same way. It was just a principle that we all established, no matter what organization, and it proved successful in prison. It proved successful when we were on the streets. I hope you guys think the same way. When somebody says, you know, they're trying to be a true anarchist, a true socialist, a true communist, or a true whatever, you know, ask them, well, what's the principle of it? I mean, who are you against and who are you for? And you stand, if they stand with you, you understand it. It's, again, like I say, this is how it starts right now, the way we gather here. And we get the ideas and see who's who. And when we see these faces again, we will know where they're at.
I'd say it's a lot about alliances, as Ron was talking about. You don't have to, everybody doesn't have to agree all down the line on every single thing. But if you can create meaningful alliances around things that matter, you're going to be much more powerful, because each group will have its own constituency that it won't all be overlapping, and you can put it together in an alliance form to deal with specific. You have to decide then, okay, somebody's trial we're going to organize around, or some event, or some particular corporation, or whatever. But I really think that you don't want to go down the path of making everybody have to be the same all the way down the line. That's a problem.
I always say the best way to recognize a crooked stick is to put a straight stick beside it. And you ain't got to fight who got the crooked stick. Just lay the straight stick down and go on about your business. The best way to stop fighting is to stop fighting.
I think we can take one. Oh gosh, I think we can. We'll take these last two questions, and these two can start up first, and then we're gonna have to take a break.
Did you want to record it or?
I'm in school right now, and I go to Reed College, which is pretty liberal, and we were trying to organize a movement, like my friends and I were trying to organize a movement to raise awareness about these problems. I was wondering what kind of advice you could give to students who are trying to organize at their school, because unfortunately there seems to be a lot of apathy, even though a lot of people believe in these things. And I have another question that's kind of related. Because people have sort of lost faith in the Occupy movement succeeding, is there a way to redefine moving forward without talking about Occupy? Do you think that would be helpful?
In the Black Panther Party, we used to say that power, the definition of power, is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desirable manner. So exposing contradictions and defining, you know, what's taking place around you and make it act, not let it control you, but you control what's taking place around you. And the best way, you know, to come together, and the best way to start something is to look at each individual, look at something that you see, such as hunger, such as child abuse, such as homelessness. Look at something that you have a passion for, and work diligently to deal with that. And somebody else come along and see hunger along with homelessness. You working with homelessness, you working with hunger because they have a passion for that. And so what's bringing you together is not so much your individuality, but the common passion that you have for to eliminate suffering. To eliminate human suffering. And that's what you look at and seek out each person that want to work with you. What passion do they have? What do they see that's hurting human development, that's hurting human existence? And work at eliminating it. And as you work at eliminating it, what your passion, their passion, and you come together with common principles that you're trying to make human existence a better thing. That's what we all for. That's what we all want to do. Well, then you will be able to have unity. You'll be able to come together collectively, and you'll be able to deal with numerous issues.
I saw in Occupy movement a very strong movement, but the weakness was they kind of believed in the government, believe it or not. When the government made a law saying you can't stay there or you can't stay there, they'd break up, they'd move to someplace else. But there's sometimes, if you have to say, when you're going to be a revolutionary, you got to break the law. So no matter what they say, you can't stay there, the heck with it, I'm breaking the law, we're staying there. The student movement in the 60s and 70s was that way. They always said, you cannot demonstrate this way, you cannot occupy this building, that the students went ahead and did it anyways. So, every outlaw is not a revolutionary, but if you're going to be a revolutionary, you got to be an outlaw.
Mine is a bit of a historical question. When the Days of Rage took place in Chicago, Fred Hampton famously called those actions custoristic, and because of the fear that he had that it would come back on the black community. I'm curious if Ron and Mark and Kit can say, looking back 3 decades, whether or not they agree with that statement that he made at the time.
I could be real short on that. I was just coming into my own about that time. I was still in prison, not trying to be political.
Yeah, I believe they have come back. The things that we fought for, the things that we died for, the things that 47 numerous Panther members, numerous people lost their lives for, struggled for, they've come back. But what they've come back on a more more sophisticated basis. They come back more subtly, but yet it's still here. The same things that we fought and died for are the same things that yet perpetuate themselves in the wars around the country, around the world, the different oppressive, the unemployment, the lack of medical care, and stuff like that. When we said free medical care, we didn't mean subsidized medical care based on your ability to pay. We didn't say that. We said that a right is not based upon a sliding scale basis, but a right is based upon your human right to have it, and we should be creative enough, and with all the money that's generated, not from the government, but people can generate, should be put toward meeting those human needs. So yes, I say these things have come back, and I even look at the Occupy movement as the people that and I'm not trying to criticize the Occupy movement, I'm saying basically the majority of the Occupy movement were people that said what's happening to the blacks could never happen to us at that time. And so they slipped down from the upper middle class to the lower middle class, and then from the lower middle class to the lower class. And so what I'm trying to say is that atrocity and suffering and oppression cannot be confined to one area, like that. Eventually it's going to spread, and it's spread in this country. And so now we have a lot of people that used to oppose the Black Panther Party, saying they were threatening their economic stability, are now in the Occupy movement.
Well, Fred Hampton was right, and he was shot in his bed not many months later. Yeah, as I said, we were crazy. We were just so angry we couldn't think straight. So that's not the way you want to be. You need to be more thoughtful, and the impression I get is that you are being more thoughtful, but at the same time you have to remember what Mark said, is that you cannot be a revolutionary without being an outlaw.
One more round of applause for our panel.
Very quickly, I would like to encourage anybody in the Occupy movement or in the anarchist movement is to document and chronicle your experience. Write a play or a novel or a short story or something that exposes what your hearts and minds are about for the public.
So we're going to take a 25-minute break. We're going to come back at 3 o'clock. We have another panel about, speaking of being intelligent, that's going to give us some help on the current situation. So everybody make sure to come back for that. We have a couple announcements as you're on your way out. There's a noise demo tomorrow at CTAC starting at 3:30. So I'm not sure if there's a carpool around for that, but just meet at the CTAC Detention Center. See anybody at a table or me for more details, I guess, if you need them. Also, there's an amazing journal made by some of the folks around here. There's going to be an event tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Journal is called Lies, a Journal of Materialist Feminism. So please show up for that as well. It's waiting till after the noise demo. Great, thanks. Have a good break. See you in 20 minutes. If you want info about the CTAC event, South 200th Street and 26th Avenue South, tomorrow 3:30. That's South 200th Street and 26th Avenue South in CTAC, tomorrow at 3:30. Noise demo in solidarity with Grand Jury Resistors Matt Duran and Catherine Cadio Solution. Rock.